Greetings, agents. We've all seen firsthand the destruction and chaos that followed the outbreak of green poison. It's left us with a mess of a city. A mess that we, the Division, have been fighting to clean up. We've made steady progress over the last month, but in order to truly complete our mission and raise this city back up out of the fires of chaos, we all need to better understand what got us here in the first place. So with that in mind, today I present you with the first-hand account of Specialist Robert Armitage Jr., eyewitness to the fall of Manhattan.
Understood. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I was in the dark zone when we pulled out. Yeah, I'm okay to talk about it. My name? Specialist Robert Armitage Jr., Army National Guard, New York, 42nd Infantry Division. Yes, ma'am, it's a mouthful. Electronics engineer, wife and 2 kids in Utica. Mobilized mid-December after the governor declared a state of emergency. We knew there was an outbreak. We didn't know of what. No, ma'am. My experience, they don't tell you those things unless they're relevant, and it wasn't. Not yet. Well, you join up, you pretty much give them leave to do whatever they want to you.
It would seem that the National Guard really didn't know what they were going up against in the coming weeks. For all they knew, this was just another emergency that was going to blow over in a few days. Not an unreasonable assumption for a normal situation. However, as we all now know, the situation in Manhattan has been anything but normal.
When did I get to Manhattan? Early days. Right after the outbreak. They mobilized us on the 7th, had us in transports to the city on the 8th. Quarantine was already coming down. It was weird as hell to be traffic going into Manhattan and not see anything coming out. People hadn't started dying yet, but already things were pretty shaky. Half the city was sick, and the other half didn't go to work because they were afraid of getting sick.
Judging by this account, the outbreak was already just over a week old by the time the city was quarantined and the National Guard was mobilized. All things considered, it was a fairly quick response, and one that was able to contain the situation initially. The city was still scared though, and that's what would prove the most problematic moving forward.
Our initial orders were to liaise with Sarah and provide support. Build aid stations and help them set up those field hospitals. City policing we left to the civil authorities, though they could see we were getting stretched pretty thin. But we built structures. We safeguarded supply drops, we handed out blankets and water bottles, and we held the line on the quarantine. Nobody was getting off the island. Not if we could help it. Had to shoot a few people who tried. I'm not proud of that.
Still, all went according to plan at first. The National Guard was able to link with Sarah and get relief efforts underway. There was some civil unrest since the whole city was getting choked with fear of this new disease, but so far, so good. The problem was that green poison was only just getting started.
Then people started dying. For real dying. Not just old folks and kids. People were dropping dead in the streets. People dying in their apartments and nobody would find them for days. The hospitals, they were turning people away because they had nothing left. But that was okay, because Sarah had those mass treatment centers and they were going to be it. By that point, the cat was out of the bag on the smallpox thing. But we still had hope, you know? Sarah was going to beat this thing, and then we were all going to go home. Meanwhile, the city was falling to shit around us.
It would seem that all that pent-up fear gripping the city finally boiled over and sent everything out of control once the disease finished its course and people started dying. What was once a tenuous situation at best now turned incredibly dangerous now that people had concrete reason for their fear, and all that was left to fight the disease were Sarah's mass treatment centers. There was still hope, but it was a hope that would eventually crumble along with the rest of the city.
The ATF? They were trying, doing their best during all this. Firemen, cops, crossing guards, you name it. All of them trying to keep things running when the water stops flowing and the lights start going out. And all you got is a badge and a promise that things are going to get better. People start getting crazy in the streets, stealing food, taking it from their neighbors. What are you going to do? After a while, they linked us up with them and called us all JTF. But it still wasn't enough.
It was about this time that all public services, including the National Guard deployed to the city, were linked up into what we now know as the JTF. It was a move made in response to the widespread panic and survivalist desires that now gripped those stuck in the city. It is important to note that all of this was made worse due to a shortage of water and a near complete shutdown of the Manhattan power grid. Having those utilities may not have prevented our current predicament, but one cannot help but wonder if it would have gotten this bad had they not been allowed to fail in the first place. Nevertheless, they did fail, and the combined services of the JTF simply weren't enough to quell the unrest. After all, they just didn't have the necessary material to provide the needed relief.
Early days, there was talk of hooking up with that PMC someone paid to guard their offices in Wall Street. Last Man Battalion, they were called. Complete bunch of shitheads. If they played ball, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so bad. But their CO, this Bliss asshole, he decides they're not working with nobody. So suddenly we got a war going with those guys while the disease is out of control. Not enough we got a superbug trying to kill us. Goddamn Merc's gotta try it too.
This account doesn't specifically say when L&B went rogue, but it sounds like it happened at about this time people started dying and the city started really getting out of control. We will never know how things would have turned out had L&B not decided to start a war with the JTF. However, we can be certain that groups like the Cleaners and the Rikers wouldn't have had such an easy time carving out sections of the city for themselves. Who knows? If L&B had actually decided to work with the JTF, then maybe those gangs might have been able to rise at all.
But that's all besides the point. Because the real problem was those treatment centers. They failed. Everybody died. The patients, the doctors, the nurses. The poor sons of bitches dumping bodies into the mass graves they had to dig in Central Park. Everyone. People dying on the inside, people shooting at us on the outside. When they finally told us to pull out, it was a blessing. Except now, all that's behind barbed wire. Yeah. That's where your dark zone came from. And the things I've seen, I don't care how much you're offering. I'm never going back in.
He's right, though. The root of all this was the green poison virus. If Sarah couldn't stop it, then everything was going to spiral out of control regardless. As we all know, they couldn't. All the mass treatment centers did in the end was concentrate the sick and the resources in the center of the city. The sick infected those sent to help. L&B and the gangs pressed for the resources. Their combined weight forced the JTF out, which created the region we know today as the Dark Zone. As long as this zone remains outside of JTF control, we'll never be able to restore the city to what it once was. The lesson here, agents, is that the real enemy here is the disease that caused all this in the first place. All of this chaos and destruction and death is just a symptom that we are now finally able to treat, since we're well on our way to developing a vaccine for the green poison. If we keep our guard up and never lose focus, we will take back the Dark Zone, and we'll once again see this city filled with life and laughter. The first wave of JTF and the division may have failed, but we can make sure that their failure isn't permanent. That's all for today, agents. More information to follow in our next communication. Until then, stay alive and keep up the fight.